Okay, so well, Fynhan da a croeso. Good afternoon and welcome to this Centre for Digital Public Services Knowledge Sharing Series event. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Victoria Ford. I'm working with the Centre and I'm going to be supporting today's session. I know most of you are probably familiar with Zoom as a platform, but before I introduce our speakers today, I'd just like to take us all through a few tips that will hopefully make this work smoothly and also to explain the format for the session. Because this is a Zoom webinar and not a Zoom meeting, you don't need to worry about the mute button. You'll automatically be on mute. And when it comes to the Q&A session, we can unmute you so you can ask your question if you'd like to. When we move on to the questions part, you can either raise your hand using the button at the bottom of your screen. For some people, you can't always see that button, but if you click on participants, it should become visible. So if you'd like to ask a question and raise your hand, we can then invite you to talk. Or feel free to put your question into the chat function at any time and we can pick it up from there. We've got an hour booked out this afternoon, and in a moment I'm going to hand you over to our speakers, and after that we'll open the floor to questions and discussion. Now, we're happy to use the full hour to answer any questions you might have and to hear your thoughts, but if we finish earlier, that's fine as well. If you have any technical issues or general queries, please use the chat function, and if we can help, we will, and if we can't, we'll take the issue offline. Also, please feel free to use the chat function to talk amongst yourselves during the session. We're hopefully getting a bit closer to being able to run some face-to-face sessions alongside online ones. But for now, let's use the tech we have and try and build our networks and stay engaged that way. So please use it to chat, ask questions, make comments, that's all good. If you do have any issues, then please leave a comment in the chat function and my colleague Anne Howard will do her best to help you. Anne Howard's happy to support you in English or Welsh today, and she'll say a few words on that in a moment. Please be aware that we're recording the session to be able to share it with those who've been unable to join us this afternoon, and we'll be sharing the link on our website and on social media later this week. So before I go on any further, Anne Howard, could I ask you to say a couple of words, please, about the bilingual support that's available today?
Ie, diolch yn fawr i chi gyd am ymuno hefo ni pnawn yma. Mae'n groeso mawr i chi rannu sylwadau trwy gyfrwng Gymraeg neu gofyn cwestiwn trwy Gymraeg a na i gyfieithu i chi. Felly gobeithio nwch chi fwynhau'r sesiwn a nôl drosodd i ti, Victoria.
Diolch yn Howard. So in today's session, we're looking at technology choices. So as a centre, we're continuing our work to create digital service standards that are common across all public service organisations in Wales. And when it comes to technology, our digital service standards state that, and I'm just going to read out the lines from our digital service standards on this one, we should make technology decisions that help teams to do their work and deliver. We should always aim to use the simplest, most appropriate tool and avoid vendor lock-in to specific technologies. Teams should be empowered to use the tools that work for them and encouraged to consider tools that meet open standards, are cloud-based, and have widespread adoption and support. So today our speakers are going to be looking at how we make that a reality, where this is already happening and where the blockers are, where it's not. We're joined by Dafydd Vaughn, who's a member of our advisory panel, Sam Hall, Local Government Chief Digital Officer, and Mike Ogonovsky, Chief Digital Officer for an Iron Bevan Health Board. So I'm going to share my screen now and ask Di if he will kick off today's session for us. So bear with me while I do the screen sharing, which you kind of always hope is going to be straightforward and never usually is. No, as I imagined.
Never as straightforward as you want.
It isn't, is it? It isn't. I had the PowerPoint easy, but I'm going to have to share my desktop instead. So I will, let me just check that. Yeah, I'm going to have to share my desktop, so bear with me. Well, you probably see yourselves when I do that initially, which is always a killer, isn't it? Let's go across to presentation. Okay.
I'll sort of make a start and
thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So hi everyone. I'm Dafydd Vaughn. I'm a member of a CDBS advisory panel. I've been involved in digital transformation in one way or another for a while. My background is software engineering and human-computer interaction, and I was part of the team that set up the UK Government Digital Service 10 years ago. And since then, I've been doing work in various different organisations, such as the DVLA and Ministry of Justice and Legal Aid Agency, helping them make technology decisions, but also helping other governments like Nova Scotia and the state of California, and various other private sector organisations to help them deal with their large and complex legacy IT problems. Making technology choices is a complex issue. The technology world moves really quickly, and the industry changes fundamentally every few years. If you can think back to the iPhone and realize that it's only 15 years old, but it's changed how people interact with products and services. In 2012, around 15% of people accessed a large government website using a mobile device. Today, that's 65%. The number of people using tools like Zoom, Teams, FaceTime on a daily basis has grown massively over the last 18 months. People using it for day-to-day work, socializing with friends, and for things like talking to their GP. And people are more used to using online services like shopping online and internet banking. And a third of shopping is now done online, whereas before it used to be significantly lower. As these things have changed, so have people's expectations for how they interact with government. And the speed of these changes mean that the technology choices that we might have made 15 years ago aren't appropriate anymore. The technology choices that we make today might not be appropriate in 3, 5, or 10 years' time. And that means that we need to be flexible. We need to be able to change as the world changes around us. And the technology that we pick needs to do the same. We've all probably heard horror stories about how long, overrunning, expensive technology projects happen. And we heard stories about IT systems being difficult to use or making it difficult for people to do their jobs. Computer says no is something we hear of all too often, and our systems are down happens too regularly. This isn't a thing that's unique to government and the public sector, but in the private sector, poor technology can hurt profits. In the public sector, it can hurt people's lives. Public services should be built around the needs of users. They should be simple to use, whether you're a member of the public trying to get something done or a public servant trying to do your job. The technology choices we make should support that. It should help people do what they need to do and not make it more difficult. And one of the aims of the work that CTPS is doing is to help with that. And this means a couple of things that we need to take account of or think about when we're making technology decisions. We need to change how we make decisions about technology by putting users first and not technology first. These are things such as it means testing systems with small groups of users before rolling it out widely. It means making quick, regular, incremental changes to services rather than designing everything up front and delivering it in a big bang. It means making choices that result in smaller, shorter contracts that allow us to replace technology if it doesn't do what we need it to do, and avoiding large monolithic procurements that proclaim to solve all the problems. It means sharing what we're doing and how we're doing it so that we can learn from others and others can learn from us. It's about baking in accessibility and security and privacy right from the beginning and thinking deeply about the ethical implications of the technology choices we're making. It means giving staff the tools they need to do their jobs well. It means avoiding tying ourselves to specific vendors because this makes it difficult for us to change as our users change. If we aren't able to change quickly, we wouldn't be able to respond to things like a global pandemic. We should be focusing our efforts on where they're most useful, not reinventing the wheel. So we should be using commodity services and open source tools where they exist. And it means dealing with existing legacy IT contracts that aren't fit for purpose and trying to avoid creating toxic legacy tech. The technology that we use needs to be sustainable in terms of both maintenance and skills, because the moment you build anything, build or buy or deploy anything new, it starts to rot immediately. But we also need to make sure that the technology choices we're making are environmentally sustainable, because tech can have a huge impact. The technology that we pick for services needs to be reliable and scalable and easy to change. On sort of a practical note, like the centre is starting to work out how to approach these technology decisions. As Victoria mentioned, the technology is included as part of a service standard. And we're also doing work with Newport Albert and Torvine and Blaenau Gwent councils on adult social care. And that's starting to explore this space and the problems and barriers that can exist by making particular tech choices. And there's going to be lots that we need to do, including guidance for teams and tools for teams across the public sector. And we're starting to think about what those might look like. And we're going to build those up incrementally over time so that teams can help make their own technology choices. Picking the right tech is going to need a change in how we think about building, buying, and funding tech. And it's not going to be easy. But if we get it right, it will mean better services for the public and better tools for public servants. With that, I'm going to hand over to Sam to talk about picking tools from, or picking technology from her perspective.
Hi, thanks, Di. Thanks for that. I'm Sam Hall. I'm 6 months into a newish role as the Welsh Local Government CDO. But I've had some experience at the coalface leading up digital data and tech teams in Birmingham City Council. So this is a wholly and unashamedly local gov hot take, but based on masses of research and focus groups and supplier meetings and all those host of other things, try and get under the lid a little bit about what's going on in Welsh local government. A lot of it will echo some of the stuff that Di's already mentioned. We seem to have a lot of long contracts across our local authorities, and this might be because of those kind of once in a lifetime, best deal ever, snap it up now for the next 5 years at least, type deals that they get offered, or because it's less hassle than procurement, or a lot less hassle than getting funding agreed more frequently. But generally, I hear feedback about lack of flexibility from suppliers once you're in contract with them, but also the ability to flex your tech stack goes right out of the window. And as Di mentioned, that's really difficult to be locked into a contract for a long time when everything you need might change within the next 2 years. So this seems to be quite a very real and an issue that's appearing again and again. We've also got lots of feedback around the thing that we got wasn't what we thought we bought. That seems to come up again really, really frequently. And there's lots of filling gaps, cobbling things together, or even, which is a horrifying thought, having to run parallel systems to do some of the job that you thought the tech you were buying would do. And it's not it's not helping alleviate the problems that were already in the system. And there's also the, you've taken advantage of our once in a lifetime, this is the best offer you'll ever get contract. It'll never be this cheap again. But don't ask us to change anything, or Lord forbid, ask us to improve anything, because this will come at a cost. And not once, but every single time you ask for something, you'll probably be charged for that. And also, it's not once for Wales either. So, whilst we might have a problem in Newport using a particular piece of tech, and Newport have that problem solved for them, that problem's also probably happening in Neath. But rather than share that problem once it's been solved, it'll be another cost and another charge for that enhancement. And that, again, feels like a real kind of big burden on our tech across Wales. I also hear this, which seems to be quite a strange one, but extremes of service levels as well. And how do we do something around that? So we seem to suffer from it across Wales, where I have one council telling me they can't get support for system issues they have, to others saying that the supplier is like a member of their team and they're always on hand. And it's the same supplier with the same system. My guess this is something to do with how much the council paid and how long the contract is for, but it's certainly an inequality that seems counterproductive to me around Wales in the technology choices that we buy. And also, there's comfort in buying technology, and I feel this quite strongly, that actually buying something makes people feel good about it because it's nice, it's tangible. Some lovely people have told us this is really good and it's going to solve our problems, and it's reassuringly expensive, and lots of other people use it, so it must be really good. And that's kind of great, but it doesn't always solve our problem. And we don't necessarily have very much faith in ourselves. So we don't have enough faith, especially across local authorities at the moment, in developing things ourselves and actually solving some of our problems and sorting our solutions, because we fall into a little bit of a trap with what the vendors can offer us. And if we try and change it, the world will end. And I do actually, not necessarily the world will end, but something quite close to that. So it's a preference to get the tech and hope it solves a problem, rather than challenging the process behind the activity. We need to get more people on the journey with us and picking the current services and only using tech to enable the right activities to happen. And the world won't end if we do that. And we'll actually probably buy and make the right technology choices because we understand what we're trying to do a little bit more. Next slide. Yeah, well, that was good. Preempted me. So some of the things that we've got to change, and I think they're really important things that we have to change. Vendor lock-in, we have to compound those long contracts. We also have a few suppliers that dominate our services. And breaking away from this is seen as really difficult. And there's almost a sense of a bit of Stockholm syndrome going on. And, meaning no offense to the vast majority of tech companies out there, but it's really not in their interest to solve all your problems. We've got to do that ourselves. So we have to be braver and look at other solutions that are more flexible and cost effective. And challenging the process, we really need to have more business analysis going on. I don't see a huge amount of that. And if we're going to make the right tech choices, we really need to do that. More process mapping. Am I showing my age there? Probably. I don't care, but we do need to do it to help service areas, get them on the journey to making the right tech choices with us. They need to understand the flow of work, the flow of data, interactions, touch points. The value of doing this is huge. If I had £1 for every time I've shown a process map to someone and they've gone, I didn't know we still did that. Well, why did we do that twice? I'd probably be really rich or at least be able to afford one of those really big coffees in Starbucks anyway. But it is invaluable in taking those people on those journeys and not having that kind of dictated tech choice to you, because this is the only thing that's going to solve our problems. Also, do the research, turn up with the right questions as a customer, speak the same language, be prepared to walk away, and be bold about what you don't need. It's not a good deal if you're buying stuff you're hardly ever going to use. And I think the amount of technology we've got across the public sector that is in the human brain category of we only use 10% is phenomenal. This is why I've got a Nexus that's still in the box. My phone is big enough. I didn't really need the tablet, but I bought it anyway because it looked really nice. But we need to be asking vendors questions. We need to be much better at being customers. And vendors love this because they love their product. So ask them as much as you can. And I don't see a huge amount of that really sort of nitty gritty stuff about, well, do I really need this? Is this really going to solve my problem or make things better for the people in my organization? Procurement misery, I don't even want to talk about it. And I bet no one else on this call will want to either. But the message is the same. It's just hard to buy stuff, especially quickly. It takes our people a lot of effort and we're not really sure why, but it properly needs kind of sorting out for the whole of the public sector and not just local gov. And I know that's something that we've looked at with the centre as well. Embracing open source is really important to me. I've not seen a great deal of open source being employed across local gov, and yet there's so much choice. So many small to medium vendors out there willing to work with us and gain a foothold with us. We should be taking advantage of that and getting involved. And again, to echo something that Di said earlier, co-designing things, working together in the open for the betterment of Wales. I don't see why there's anything bad in doing that. And actually we should try and really support people to do more of that. And then trust the data. And I don't just mean the numbers. I'm all about the data, but all the data sources. Talk to people a lot more. We need to take advantages of all the networks out there and leverage the information experience they have. If someone you trust says that didn't work in the way we hoped, or this has changed how we work for the better, or it was amazing, or that company was really hard to work with, they're worth listening to. And in the past, not listening to people has cost me dearly in some cases, and really, massively on the other hand, when I've talked to them and really dug around a little bit, it's really, really helped. I'm probably over my time, so I'm going to hand over to Mike, but obviously happy to take some questions later.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, I'm Mike Ogonovsky. I'm actually going to just tell you a story of what happened to us in Tech Cymru, which was something that I was doing with a small team in my spare time, just to look at the evidence base and best practice around technology-enabled care. We were really interested why what looked like really good technology flared up, became the new shiny, as Sam was saying, but then died away again. And to understand, is it the technology? Is it how it was implemented? Because the two things are intrinsically linked. Is it solving a problem? So, going back to the standards of starting with user need and working up from there. So one of the things we were interested in doing was understanding, engaging the appetite around video consultation, which obviously would be a third of the scope of technology. And in terms of the NHS, consultations obviously form quite a large part of life for our consultants, nurses, therapists, who need to converse with patients. From a patient's perspective, it can often mean getting 2 or 3 buses, or finding a place to park in the car park, turning up to the outpatient appointment, maybe forgetting the stuff that you'd written down, and getting between 6 and 8 minutes, almost like a job interview, to pitch what's going on with you and to try and get some decisions and go forward. So we knew that there was potentially better ways of doing it, but the actual evidence out there of the efficacy of video consultation within health was actually pretty thin. In fact, the evidence around technology-enabled care is actually pretty thin compared to the clinical world. If you're researching a new drug or surgical technique, it actually goes through an awful lot of research and evaluation and validation, as we were all watching the vaccine progress in terms of the clinical trials. It's quite robust. You get to technology and it's a little bit Wild West in terms of, well, that looks nice. I've got a bit of end of year money. Let's see if that works, but not really set out the proper thinking about what problem is it that you're trying to solve. So we started off by looking at prison service with video consultation to outpatient appointments, to care and nursing homes, and also to GP out of hours, and really looked at helping as well our colleagues in child and adolescent mental health, where they've been struggling along with Skype to no avail, but with great perseverance for some time, and tried to understand what it is they actually wanted and why was Skype. We were really interested in why was Skype not working for them, as this was something that was already in the tool set, if you like, for NHS Wales. So we engaged with the other home countries, looked at the literature, and made contact with colleagues in Scotland who were using an application, a cloud-based application called Attend Anywhere, and which seemed to suit the clinical processes of arriving, checking in, waiting a turn, being seen, and then closing off the consultation. So we decided to try that within those areas with relative success. But what we were setting out to do, what our brief was really to understand, not to declare success, not necessarily to promote video consultation, but to understand from taking an academic approach to evaluation what actually works, not just for the clinician, but also for the patient. That was a joy to work with, and up until February 2020 was going at its own pace, and we were doing a lot of small scale trials. And then, of course, we started to see problems in China, and then very much so in Italy. And before we knew it, we were going into lockdown. And colleagues in Welsh Government asked if we'd be able to scale up and scale out a video consulting platform in a very quick period of time, starting with primary care and trying to get that done in 12 weeks. So living by our principles that we'd adopted of agility and taking the agile and trying to walk the walk with that, but also the GDS principles, what we were then faced with was having to go back and say, well, we don't really know, because we were still in discovery phase and still working out what needed to be done. But COVID really meant that we just had to make choices. We had to make decisions, and we had to make decisions on the best available information that we had. So again, we conversed with the other home countries who found themselves also in a very similar position to us, and decided that what would be the most appropriate way forward, given that time was absolutely of the essence. Di was talking about people at the end of mistakes rather than profit. And we saw, particularly in my own home patch of Newport, the COVID pandemic took hold very quickly, and deaths were occurring at ever increasing numbers. So we knew we wanted a cloud-based solution, because that solution would be scalable. We knew we wanted to work with others, as Sam was saying, as checking out with other interested countries as to what was already working. And Attend Anywhere had a pretty good track record already in Scotland. And we were subletting their rooms in Amazon Web Services to do the trial. And we knew that they're on a framework, just to touch on that nasty procurement word. So we knew that we could take it pretty quickly. We also decided that to try and integrate it with anything would probably be the death of the project, and mean that we'd be held up left, right and centre. And after all, we were looking at this from a clinical perspective, and this is just about making a conversation between a patient and a clinician of any discipline. What the clinicians do after that is write up their notes. So in the same way, right across Wales, there were different ways of doing that with different applications, or indeed using paper, but this would lend itself to be able to do that. So our choices in a way were made for us, but I just wanted to share the experience of it, and that the world didn't end. Usually this would have been everyone agreeing, that's at least 12 months, about what the problem is and what the potential solutions are. Then we like to do a competitive dialogue procurement with a complete output-based specification that we all agree on, which takes another year just to agree on the requirements. Then we like to make sure that it's gold standard and is integrated with everything, which is laudable and the right aim to have, but not at the cost of making any progress whatsoever. What we did do was go to G-Cloud, and we bought this product off the shelf. COVID meant that EU tender regulations as well was a little bit more relaxed. There wasn't a facility to record in Attend Anywhere the conversation, which meant it was much more friendly to a data protection impact assessment, and the information commissioner had less to concern themselves with. And it meant that we'd be able to deploy in more than one organization at a time. Now, this is quite key, because some of these big procurements, these big applications that we buy one at a time, but once for Wales, often can mean that you're constrained with a supplier's capacity to support the implementation. And that can be one or two organizations at any one time. Now, meaning in terms of NHS, that's 10 organizations potentially that have to wait one after another to go through for first of type to beta to live, to learn lessons, to refine, to move on to the next one. And of course, for local government world, you can just multiply that even more. What we were able to do with this instead was focus on enablement, rather than trying to dictate how this application could be implemented or should be implemented, which disease or speciality area to start with. We had a brief from Welsh Government and we worked within that. So we started with primary care. We were able to carry on a goodwill basis from our colleagues in NHS Scotland, using our sublet room and maxing that right out, and piloted and evaluated the implementation of Attend Anywhere with GPs in Gwent, who I should be forever grateful for, because discovery really meant discovery, and things did go wrong. But that really helped us develop a toolkit around permission for clinicians, a toolkit that was able to confirm that insurance was covered, vicarious liability, indemnity, but also a toolkit that was developed with clinicians in the setting that was pertinent to them, to get the most out of it and to be able to evaluate that. We were using a very short evaluation at the end, a little bit like a trust pilot review, if you like, but asking slightly different questions of both the clinician and the patient. We captured tens of thousands of evaluations over that period, and we've continued to do so, where we were able to see, using that research and evaluation in an active way, in an agile way, week on week, even day by day in the very early days, to work out why things were going wrong, to be able to refine the toolkit, to follow up with clinicians who were struggling to find out what we could do to help. And that raised up a number of things where assumptions had been made, like we were seeing that over 65s were very small users as a demographic, because we asked people what age group they were in. But the age group of over 65s who did use it rated it very highly. We went back to the practices where the usage was low, and they'd made an assumption in the best interests that more elderly patients would be less confident and competent with technology than younger. So with that, we said, well, can we ask you just to offer it, and if they say yes, to use that? And we saw the numbers go up, and they've stayed up. In fact, the over 65, just checking my crib notes, are a larger demographic use than the under 16s, which has been an interesting one for us. So in terms of the evaluation to date, we've got 45,000 returns now. We're carrying out across therapies, across medical, community care, acute care, as well as primary care. Dentists, optometrists, and high street pharmacists are using Attend Anywhere to varying degrees, without a diktat from the centre to say this is where you need to start and this is exactly how you need to use it, but rather by developing a community of practice and saying, well, who puts their hands up, particularly in a pandemic, are the people that you need to work with first. What we found is developing is areas of expertise in using the technology in different disciplines in different areas. So for sexual health clinics in Cardiff, really embrace this. And of course, when you stand back and look at this, you realise that for someone who may be attending a sexual health clinic, that attending via video consultation or not having to physically present actually helps their numbers increase. We found that speech and language therapy in my own patch in Iron Bevan almost went completely to virtual, and we're able to do ward rounds in care homes and swallowing assessments, which is very important for care home residents to get properly fed and to get the nutrition. Their quality of service went up and their capacity went up also. But in how our trauma and orthopedics led the way. This has led to now an exchange of ideas and expertise that's developed over the last year, where one health board can go to another for advice about, well, how did that work and why did it work? And a clinical to clinical discussion can be had that enables the right reasons to be able to adopt technology. So what did we learn from this? Well, first of all, I think for me, the personal reflection was it was quite frightening for me, and it was a bit weird for government and NHS colleagues not to say, here's a plan that's going to conduct every detail with a critical path through it from beginning to end, that you can all see where you're at, and we'll stick to time and run a risk register, and then of course get late. What we did instead was try and have the self-confidence say, we're not quite sure how this is going to work, because there is no evidence. We'd learned that much from our pre-work. And so we decided that the best way was to be as collegiate as possible, working with national partners as well as with local health board and trust partners to discover together. And that's where we really found our philosophy was starting to take hold, where there was a collective genius within the community that was delivering this, but also within those clinical groups who wanted to try it first. Once that taken hold and we were able to share that good news, we saw that it was increasing and increasing every week. So now we've done nearly 200,000 consultations since May last year, from zero. So we were that's something for us to celebrate. And we're average between 4,500 and 5,500 video consultations in the NHS per week. We still are doing lots of evaluation. We're still working with the other home countries and with Oxford University about the different approaches we've taken and the different policy impacts that's been had. But what we're able to demonstrate through that is a real business case that even if we were to move on tomorrow and hand it over to somebody else, we can see that it saves patient time. We can see that it can save clinician time, but not always. But in terms of carbon saved and cost savings, there is also an attractive proposition. And we're also seeing in some specialities that did not attend rates, so that's the rate of people that don't turn up to outpatient appointments, is actually reduced when using video consultation compared with the historic face-to-face. We didn't set out to find that out. We didn't set out with that as an objective, but that's something that we've identified, and now we want to work with to see if that's going to have an impact on the areas that have the highest DNA rates in terms of outpatients, to make the service more efficient. I think I've probably, I'm running out of, I need to get a glass of water.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Mike. And we'll pause then. I'll stop sharing the screen a moment so we can bring people up. Thank you, all three of you. Some really interesting insights and thought-provoking things in there. I've got a few questions I'd like to ask, but before I do, just to say, if anyone would like to ask a question, two options: just drop it in the Q&A box, and we'll either read it out for you if it's anonymous, or if it's got your name to it, we'll invite you to come up and ask the question yourselves. When I say come up, that just means having your voice. Don't panic, I'm not going to make you go anywhere. But we'd love to get the conversation going. So please do drop any questions you've got in, or pop your hand up and we'll use those. There's a couple of things though, while we're waiting to see what questions come in, that struck me from that. And I suppose I'll start with one that came from what you were saying, Mike, there. You know, about your real-time learning collaboration, but significantly, the shift once COVID happened, and things had to change. So it's got me thinking about all the challenges that we have around technology and change and tech, and a lot of the things that Sam pulled out in particular. How much of that do you think for public sector in Wales is about skills, technical understanding, doing technology differently, and how much of it's actually about culture?
I think it's hugely about culture. I think appetite for risk is a difficult conversation to have in the public sector. Failure is a difficult conversation to have in the public sector, but that can lead to greater losses and greater misery in the longer term. I think in terms of technologists, there is a huge still set of untapped assets. What Sam said really resonated with me, is that we don't look to sweat assets with a value or a benefit slant in the architecture components that we already have. I think that we've got a lot of expertise in a technical sense within NHS, and I've seen that just from some of the joint work we've done with local government, and in many respects, streets ahead. Get quite jealous and insecure when I see some of the work that's been done by my partners there. I think the problem is when we interface with the business, and often the business will find it difficult to articulate well enough the goals that they're looking to achieve, or the problems that they're looking to resolve, so that we can make the appropriate technology choices, but also implement them in a way that really helps the business of health and care. That's stuff that we're looking to change locally, and I think that COVID gave us the permission to build a critical mass, but to be able to say, well, we don't know if this is going to work, but what we're going to do is to use the agile process so that we'll learn really quickly what doesn't work and why, so that we can correct it. So it sounds a little negative to start with, but if you plan for failure a bit more than planning for success, and have the confidence to be able to declare problems in a constructive way so that you can fix them, I think that's quite exciting, and we found that quite exhilarating, to be able just to not to need to defend a position, but to say, oh, that's really interesting, what's gone wrong there? What do we need to do to fix that? Is it a process problem? Is it a clinical governance issue? Is it, health legislation or a business process issue? or is it a technology issue? And usually you find it's a mishmash of everything, but you get in there as a joint team. So, in the NHS, we talk about multidisciplinary teams. And I think that, IT digital is a member of that multidisciplinary team, or a clinical division within the NHS.
Thank you, Mike. Sam, any thoughts from your perspective on that culture versus technology?
So I think there's a shift. I think there's been a shift in understanding the kind of digital and technology and that the whole piece around it, about starting to look at rather than looking at digital and technology as kind of a thing in a box over there that gets done by other people, but now being the thing that you do every day. But that shift is quite slow. And in some areas it is quicker than others, and in some authorities it's quicker than others. But there is that thing about having conversations with people whose responsibility it is to do kind of waste and recycling, and saying to them, your service is a digital service, and technology underpins and supports what you do. No, it doesn't. We empty bins. No, you use GPS mapping to understand that. You work out your ratios on your fuel based on the technology that you're using now. And so it's having those conversations and kind of building that in. And I think we've got quite a bit of a way to go. But I certainly think that is changing. And I think what's really helped is I've been having lots of chief exec meetings around councils lately. And I failed yet to come up with a chief exec that doesn't say, digital is it is right up there on my agenda. I can see it's working. I really know that we need to dedicate as much as we can to it. And it doesn't feel like lip service. And I think maybe a year or two ago, it would have felt a little bit more like that. COVID's kicked the can right down the road. And now, we have to work out how we can keep moving that cultural bit further as well. I think we've got a few little things that are going to come up around technology and change that may be little, not stumbling blocks in the road, but things we have to get around. So we're talking about automation and technology that automates things, and RPA. And then we also have to think about what the human effect is with that. And when I talk about RPA with authorities, I'm not always talking to the technology people about that or the service people. I have to have that conversation with HR as well, because they need to understand actually that potentially this is going to change how people work. And then they'll say, yeah, we also need to talk to the union then about that, because that might change people's contracts and how they work. So it is a culture change, but it is one that I feel is much more being embraced now. But it is changing it from digital and tech is in a box. It is just how you do things now.
Thank you. And again, in the spirit of encouraging conversation, if anyone's got any thoughts on that from their own organisations and you'd just like to chip in at all, please do just put your hands up or drop it into the chat. But can I stick on skills a little bit a moment, and I'll come to you, Di, with this one. Listening to all three of you actually got me thinking about what the skills are that the public sector in Wales is going to need to make those right technology choices. And I was wondering, is it about technology skills? Is it about supplier management? Is it something else? Is it a whole group of things? I'm interested in your experience, Di, of seeing this happen across different countries, and what your thoughts are in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a mixture of all of the above. Like, we're absolutely going to need technology skills or technologist skills within public sector to be able to make decisions, to be able to understand what it is that suppliers are telling you. One of the things that has happened in the past all too often is a company has come along and said, we have this lovely shiny product that will solve all your problems. And there's been no one available to challenge it and ask, well, what does that actually mean? How does that product actually meet our needs? How does it work? How does that product work with these other tools and these other systems that we have to use on a day-to-day basis? So you absolutely need those sort of technologist skills within the public sector to be able to have those conversations and to challenge those suppliers. But there is also an element of you've got to manage the suppliers that you have. It's very easy to not manage suppliers and to just let them slowly grow or get to the point where you're so reliant on a particular supplier or a particular product the supplier offers that you have got no way to innovate, you've got no way to improve that service, no way to change it, because it's the way it is, and it's been there for a long time. So you need to be able to do both. I think it's going to be important for public sector to think about stuff like user research and making sure that Mike talked a lot in his bit about understanding how users are using the services. And if everything starts there and you are understanding what it is users need before you get into talking about technology decisions, it helps you make better technology decisions. And then actually, one thing I'd like to say is repeat what Sam said, which is IT and digital should not be in a box. It is part of everything you do. Chief executives, senior officials, they should all have an understanding of digital and technology, because it is their business. It is how everything runs, and so they are going to need those skills as well.
Yeah, it's that line where people go, I don't do tech. And it's like, well, we might learn to. There'll be different levels for different people, granted, but an understanding of how it can support operating your business and the services you're providing has got to be a key part of what we need in leaders.
Exactly. And I think it's given how important technology is to the running of any organization, it's probably not appropriate anymore for anyone at a senior level to say, I don't understand tech. That is a thing that needs to change.
Lovely, thank you. We've got a couple of questions come in, so I'm going to ask Stephen Newstead. I can see you've asked a couple of questions in the chat. I've pressed the allow to talk button, so if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask the question, it's always better so you don't have to listen to me.
Yeah, no worries. Hi everyone, that was really interesting to listen to, so thanks so much for presenting it. I was just wondering, well, there's a couple of questions, right? The first one was just around, I was interested to hear you talk about COVID making you develop services faster. I guess I've got a couple of questions on that. One is, have you seen any kind of people within department, I guess the historically might be called shadow IT people, who have been empowered to kind of stand up services with low code solutions or by using SaaS solutions to try and do that more rapidly within their kind of business units, and is that a good thing, or are there any sort of challenges you've seen around that? Actually, that's it. That's the question.
Thank you. Who would like to take that? Any from Burning Point Director? I'm sort of happy to. I'm happy to sort of make an initial response to that, I guess. One of the things that's probably worth noting is like low code has become a phrase that is so nebulous as it can encounter a whole bunch of different types of technologies. Public sector should absolutely definitely be using SaaS solutions where they exist. Software as a service tools are almost generally commodity tools that everyone's using. We shouldn't be reinventing that. We should be trying to use those and putting our efforts into stuff that is unique to public sector. There are other types of low-code tools which are much more complex and difficult and can add more difficulty to changing things. I see many organizations I work with use a mixture of software as a service and other types of low-code tools, but they're definitely worth thinking about and including in technology choices and using them where you can. I noticed one of the things you mentioned when in your type questions about RPA, and yeah. RPA is another one of those tools that is available and can be used, and it can be useful in certain circumstances, and in other circumstances it can make things much more complex and difficult. RPA can make it very difficult to replace any legacy technology that you've got in place. So if you are going to use it, it's a case of understanding what the repercussions are in detail of using a tool like that. And as Sam mentioned earlier, there's potential add-in issues around HR and unions and that kind of thing as well. So low-code tools can be useful and can be helpful, but need to be, like with any technology, you need to be really careful about where they're used and why they're used, and making sure that you have a plan for replacing those at a later date.
Thank you. Sam,
Yeah, so just to add to that, I agree. I think if you walk into any organisation that says we're going to use RPA or automation because it's going to streamline everything and we're going to save loads of money, that's generally the wrong approach to come from. The right approach to come from is it's not quite the clunky services. Actually, sometimes it's the slick services that RPA really helps with, because what it does is it takes away some of that kind of time stuff that just is a process that needs to be done. It's not hard. Quite often, it's quite simple, but it takes some time. And some of the services that we used RPA for in Birmingham were in revenues and benefits. And that was mainly because we were able to take the people out of that. Is the whole point of taking the robot out of the person and automate some of that work. And then those folks could spend more time on dealing with errors in the system and complaints. So our complaints went down from 21 days to 3-day turnaround. That was a really good use of RPA. What wouldn't have been a really good use is if we'd just done that and we'd replaced the people and we'd done that slick thing, but we hadn't actually thought about the wider use of why we wanted to automate. And that was to free up those people to make sure that our users had a better service. And I think you need to look at both sides of it. It's not all about saving money. It's not all about doing something quicker. It's about the whole service. And there are some candidate services and some candidate processes which you can look at and you go, that's perfect. That's a perfect candidate for this. And there are some where you go, I could do it, but I shouldn't, because this is not going to add value to that end user. It's really not. It might save a bit of money or it might save a bit of time, but actually it's probably not going to improve their service. And completely agree with Di as well, is if you nail some of these things into your technology, you're a bit screwed when you try and move. And it's hard to get back. So, there's a lot of thought that goes around it, which is why it's not, I think it's why it's not accelerated through a lot of organizations. The ones that are clever do it very carefully, and they tread their way through it really, really carefully.
Thank you, Sam. You might want to stay off mute because I'm going to ask Albert if he would like to ask his question, which is a local authority focused question. Albert, you should have had a prompt to say you can unmute yourself.
I did. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so greetings from the Western United States. This
Hello.
is fascinating. Yeah, and just as a short point, the level of pragmatism and attending to things with an eye towards risk and agility is very interesting to listen to. My question in particular was when you start working with local authorities or other entities, if you will, how do you know how well prepared they are from a technical and a business standpoint to undertake something new and digital as opposed to carrying on the way they have? How do you test their preparedness, if you will?
So I think at the moment we probably don't know enough, because we're really kind of just opening the lid a little bit on changing people's approaches to actually doing more themselves. And we're about to undertake a big piece of work with the Centre of Digital Public Service to get a better handle on that, which you really need to do. But when you talk to them, to authorities individually, you'll see the kind of the scope they've got and the willingness to try something new and to get involved with doing something differently. And I think one of the other things that we've noticed as well is that not all of the kind of digital and technical expertise is in the IT and digital teams. What's really kind of refreshing is the fact that there is talent throughout organizations. And so one of the things we have to do, or one of the pieces of work that we've been doing through kind of training and awareness sessions, is to tease those people out of the wider organization and get them to be more involved in some of these kind of problem solving, potential to look at developing stuff, in a collaborative group with other people. And quite often these people aren't from the IT or the tech, the tech teams or digital teams at all. They're from a service area, but they have enough understanding to really add value to us taking something else forward. And that's something we really want to build on, because everyone has a level of IT, but there's a lot of potential that is potentially not always focused within an authority on improving kind of digital and tech. It may be focused on something else for a really, really good reason. But if we can tap into that from the other point of view, then that would be really good too. But I'd say I'm quietly confident that there is a lot of untapped potential within the authorities. There's certainly a lot of there's a lot of smart people who are running quite difficult, complex systems. I mean, if you know anything about about local authorities and the number of things they have to run, manage, the number of people they are protecting and supporting every day, it's a huge, they're huge beasts. And before I came to Wales and when I was in Birmingham, we ran 1,400 services for 1.3 million people. It was massive. If we hadn't have had talent and people who were engaged and wanting to try new things, we would never have managed, and we certainly wouldn't have got through COVID. So I think there's more than green shoots. I think there's a lot there. We just might need to direct it in the right direction.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you.
Thanks, Albert, and thanks, Sam. We've got 2 more questions in 3 minutes, and I always pride myself on finishing these on time. So I'm going to ask Lynn if you could perhaps ask your question, and which of the panel members you'd like to direct it at as well.
Yeah, hi everybody, can you hear me? So yeah, I don't want put people on the spot or suggest that I'm suggesting spend control policy for Wales. Always dangerous in contributing to these sessions. But yeah, I'm just interested in the role of spend control and whether Di and Sam have any thoughts on the best way of doing it. And particularly in Sam, you've been talking a lot to local government, and so how are authorities managing this at the moment, and are there sufficient practices in place? Thanks.
I think overall there's a lot of spend control because we don't have enough money. But that's kind of the nuclear approach to spend control, isn't it? So it's varied across local authorities. There are some authorities that have something like a front door, common doorway, whatever process you might call it, for digital and tech spend, where it's almost like they have to pass through this gateway to know whether this is new work and how valuable it is to the organisation. So they have those processes in place and that kind of level of governance, possibly not quite in the way that a design authority would work, or an old type design authority would work, but there are certainly some things and some measures in there. I think I would be making a wild guess that the people on those boards and on those governance panels, are in-depth technologists or digital people. They're probably not. You generally get a finance person and you get someone from the business areas. But certainly that was what we had in Birmingham. But you had technologists and digital people there to try and advise them on the decisions they were taking. And then of course you've got all, there are fiery rings of hell to go through in local authorities. You go through your own department, and then that then goes up to a kind of a directorate, and then that will generally go up, and potentially if it's big money, it goes up through cabinet and through scrutiny. So there are all sorts of layers in place that are a weird kind of by de facto spend controls. It doesn't necessarily help in that way, and also there isn't something, and there's something that I'm really keen to look at how much we're spending on the same things across Wales. That's my big thing, is if everybody wants to buy a new bike, are we all buying the same one? And how do we make sure that we're not everyone's spending the same amount of money on it? So that is probably where I would like to see the kind of spend control worked, is we shouldn't be paying 22 times for the same thing. We need to be leveraging the fact that we're small, the fact that we all know each other, and the fact that a lot of our services and our problems are the same. Sorry, Di, you wanted to...
Yeah, just to sort of add to that, I think spend controls are really important for a couple of things. There's spend controls sometimes give you the ability to be able to stop unnecessary pieces of work, but that's probably the least important thing that spend controls gives you. What they really give you is a view of everything that's going on. So if you have spend controls in place on digital and technology spend, you can get a good picture of all the pieces of work that are happening across the area of control. And you can use that to start joining up people and networks and projects and pieces of work, and start to connect them up together. And it gives you a really good idea of where you're likely to be duplicating effort, where you might be able to do one piece of work that solves problems for multiple organizations. And so if you do that, you can start to get a much better idea and a much better handle on your IT and digital work across the public sector.
Thank you, Di and Sam and Mike. I'm going to have to stop us there because we are at 5 o'clock. There was one other question that we're not going to have time for, I'm afraid, but I will pass it on to the panel members. You can have a look at what was being asked afterwards. A big thank you to all three of you for talking to us today and for taking the questions. Really grateful to you for what's been a really good conversation. And thank you to everyone else who has attended today, who's listened, who's asked questions and participated. I hope it's been useful to you. We'll be putting out a short blog post summarising the session, and also with a link to the recording. So if you feel the need to watch it again, please feel free, but you may want to pass it on to colleagues if you found it useful. And I hope that we'll see you at one of the next knowledge sharing sessions that the Centre runs. Thank you, everybody.